Susanne and Niall to be seated on stage. So how does it sound so far? Are you proud of us?
Very. What else can I say? You know?
Not a leading question at all.
Not a leading question. Please tell us who you are and what you represent in the company. Tim, let's start with you.
I'm Tim Stephenson. I'm president of Global Sourcing and Trading. So I'm responsible for the purchase of our 2 million plus tons of vegetable oil each year. I've been with the AAK for 27 years, which is, I think, more than everybody else put together, actually.
Is that good or bad?
That's normal now.
It's really good to have an anchor.
And I'm also representing AAK for the last 20 years on the board of the Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil.
Thank you. Niall.
Niall Sands. I'm the president of Plant-Based Foods in AAK. I essentially run our business unit that's creating and driving our plant-based business globally, working with our regions, with Susanne's organisation, with Dheeraj's organisation in a classic matrix organisational structure. I've been in role for 3 years in this current role, and prior to that in AAK I had commercial leadership roles in our special nutrition business, as well as commercial leadership in South America and Brazil, based in Jundiaí.
Thank you. Last but not least, Susanne.
Thank you, Lydia. Susanne Jaspers, so I'm the newest kid on the block, I would say. I started with AAK on the 1st of March this year as the president for Europe, also in the executive committee of AAK. My background is a business background. I studied in Germany and the US, spent 15 plus years at McKinsey & Company, where I worked mainly in specialty chemicals, then moved to DSM in food specialties in Delft in the Netherlands. And then from there, went on to be leading globally the business for cultures and enzymes at DuPont, which then with a reverse Morris Trust deal, also integrating the culture business of IFF before joining then here.
Susanne, I'm a bit curious about Germany, actually. What is the awareness there? I mean, about the things we're going to discuss here and about the companies. Is something you can? Is there a difference between Germany and other countries?
Well, I would say, looking at AAK, and if I tell people I've changed, they said, where did you go? Well, I'm working for AAK. Unless they're in the ingredients business or one of our customers in the food business, the awareness is very low still. So I think we do have quite a job to be done here on the visibility side of our company. Also, if you compare it to other European companies like Christian Hansen, for example, or DSM, in comparison to that. So I think there's quite a way to go. The topics that we talk about today, I think, are highly relevant as well, because at the end of the day, I think a lot also what Johan said earlier, consumers and customers are confused to some degree. Also, they don't know. So the people who don't know AAK, I tell them, don't worry, you eat something from me most likely every day, right? But that's the gap in understanding where we are sitting and what that means.
There are things to be done. But to kick off this discussion, let's a little bit touch upon the growth again. As we heard, AAK has been delivering a very solid mix of volume growth and improving profitability, resulting in compounding absolute earnings of around 10% per year. Wow. What have been the drivers for this, and how sustainable is it, would you say, Johan?
Thank you, Lydia. And I think you've heard a bit about the formula, right? So leading up to today, we have had acquisitions during years behind us that you make an acquisition, you add that, bring capability, get access to a local market, and you grow from there. I think very good example by Dheeraj. That has been part of the formula. It has also been part of the formula a continuous growth of use in the applications, the customer industries that we serve. There's been an increased use of plant-based oils and fats, where we, with our strong position and a focus of co-development together with our customers, we've been able to capture that. So I think part of it you've heard along the way, and is it sustainable? Yeah, we do believe that we can continue. When you look at these trends out there, we think that there is an accelerated need of high value-added solutions with plant-based oils, and we are an expert in that field. So I certainly think it's sustainable, but I'm also transparent saying it's not easy. It's not a given. You don't get it for free. They're going to need a hard work. But I think it was really well described by Dheeraj about how to focus, how to drive the internal organization, and with that you deliver the value.
But anyway, lately volumes have leveled out somewhat. So what is your take on this, and how do you think about this going forward?
Yeah, they have leveled somewhat, and part of that we know is external impact, call it, when we decided to exit Russia. Part of that is linked to also internal decision on optimizing our bakery performance, partly by closing a plant and consolidating 3 into 2, and partly into the business climate that we're operating. So we're not concerned today, and as Thomas showed, today we are driving, operating profit per kilo to a higher extent, so we're able to deliver absolute earnings growth. But going forward, as I articulated in my presentation, it's a given that we need to grow at least with the market in terms of volumes. And in that, then focusing on the high value-added solution. So clearly we need to bring that element in. But I'm not overly concerned where we are today. It's kind of understandable.
No, but you still said that your ambition is to double EBIT per kilo by 2030. How?
Yeah, that is coming back to a stronger focus, and this is something we really drive. You might think that we were better than we were, but really working with product management, portfolio management, and what is that, right? That is looking at the number of products we have. What's the profitability by product, by segment, by customer? What can we learn from across the various sites? Can we price the products in a better way, or should we leave something that is less profitable or even negative profitability that you find when you really dissect? So there is a lot of opportunity to continue along that path to do better, and then again topping it up with strategic M&A.
Just want to hear some comments from, because you're all into this.
Maybe if I look at it also from a maximization of value perspective, right? There is also a value in driving the overall value with the fractions, the side fractions, the blends, right? I think there is a lot to be done on that front for us to grow. Plus, there are new markets that will be growing, and we need to make sure that the new naturals are actually going to be performing, also for the sustainability of the planet.
But when it comes to food ingredients, the Swedish or European market isn't that big. So my question is, are you all sure that investors and analysts understand your business model? Susanne again.
Sorry. No, like I said before, I think the ones who know us probably know us.
Yeah.
That's more a better job to be done on letting people know and be more visible around those who don't know us, but are certainly stakeholders. And there is something to be done there. And as said, our market is much bigger than Sweden, right? We are a global company. Yeah. And from that perspective, the value proposition still holds, absolutely.
Well, I think it's fair to say that when we get feedback from sometimes people in this room and other stakeholders, be that investors, analysts, there is comments around, how can you make your business model a bit more tangible, visible, right? And also the misperception to some extent around some of the oils that we're using about the sustainability promise, you could also find among investors. I think that's our job, enlighten stakeholders, but at the same time drive the right behavior internally.
I would also add to that, having worked for AAK in South America, whenever we built our first plant just outside Sao Paulo, it was quite interesting there, whenever we were ultimately there to fill the new plant, and customers in Brazil in particular knew of the reputation of AAK. We're glad to see someone of Swedish origin, of European heritage, coming down with, I think, the integrity with which we operate our business and bringing it into a very key developing market as another option. And again, someone who's anchored in innovation and strong sustainability, sort of drivers as such within the business, that was very, very well received in Brazil in particular. So I think the reputation that AAK has is recognised worldwide, much more beyond the shores of just Sweden.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true, I think, particularly within our space, where people who knows that we've got a great reputation within that space. It's more sort of outside it, and that's part of the function of today's session, I guess, in order to try and explain to investors in particular what our business model is and how we're going to operate in the future.
That's why we're here as well.
Exactly.
But let's look at it from a more sustainable angle. I understand that you have a lot of opportunities and challenges, of course. But what are your customers and consumers asking for, and how is AAK responding? And also, again, is it more important that the customers or consumers understand this?
Well,
Let me jump in here maybe first, and then I'll hand it to you, Tim, for the... So when I look at it from the customer and the consumer side, I think there is clearly the trend around sustainability that we are seeing, as well as the whole transparency topic, right? People want to know what is in their products, specifically if they want to eat them, then even more. But they are also confused, especially the consumers, because there is so much ongoing out there around deforestation regulation, palm oil, and people don't see the whole picture and the whole chain. As Johan also, you said you had a conversation at the break. I think that is exactly the point. Yeah. And I see it's AAK's role almost to calibrate that we do it in a way that it's actually good for the world and it makes sense, and that we enable our consumers foremost to make the right choices and decisions, an informed one, and not just what they heard yesterday or read as a title in the newspaper today, right? And I think that's the challenge.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that there's it's a big question. What are the challenges and opportunities within sustainability? And it comes down to what Johan was talking about earlier, between the better sourcing, better operations, and better solution. Better sourcing is the area that I'm particularly responsible for, and then within that the ESG and the environmental aspects in terms of climate change, in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and biodiversity and so on. Social aspects, which are this is a big area. So there's a social aspect as well, the human rights issues around that, and we've got to be very much aware of that. I think that without doubt the biggest challenge and opportunity for us is around palm oil. We inevitably come back to that. It's not the only oil, of course, which we source, but it's the one which, in the past at least, has been the one which has been most controversial in many people's eyes. And the biggest challenge around that, I think, might surprise you. I don't think it's the issue of deforestation or the negative side of palm oil. And palm, just to give some perspective there, palm is 32% of total veg oil production in the world is palm oil. It's doubled every year for the last 30 years. So from 1990 to 2000, it went from 10 million tons to 20 million tons, then to 40 million tons in 2010. Now it's nearly 80 million tons, despite a little bit of flatlining over the last 2 or 3 years because of COVID and so on. So that's a huge growth, and it's needed in the future. We need continuing growth in palm oil in order to feed a population.
Just to make it clear here, is it possible to replace palm oil with something else?
Well, it is. Let me just continue a minute, though, please, because I've just got a point I'd really like to make, and that the issue, I think, is about the perception of palm oil. It's not, and the perception out there, particularly in Europe, is that either it's particularly for consumers as well. To refer back to what you were saying, Susanne, is that it's either it's good or bad, and most people think it's bad. Actually, that's the biggest issue that we've got. If you look at the levels of deforestation arising from palm oil in the last 5 years, Indonesia has come down enormously, and Indonesia is one of the biggest producers of palm oil in the world. Together with Malaysia, it's 85% of the total production in the world. They've come down from 1 million hectares to 200,000 hectares last year of total deforestation. That's not good, of course, 200,000, but that's out of a total global number of 3.75 million. And out of that related to palm plantations is just 20 to 40,000, 20,000 I saw reported once and 40,000. So that's less than 0.5% of total deforestation in the world relating to palm oil, and on the right track. These countries need to get credit for that, and palm oil has to be part of the solution in the future. Yields are another big issue. You get 4 to 10 times more volume of vegetable oil from 1 hectare of palm as you do from rapeseed, sunflower seed oil or soybean oil. That's a huge difference when we've got to feed the world going forward. It means we need we need 4 to 10 times more hectarage or more area if we use other than palm oil. So there's a big message there within palm, I think.
And Liddy, just to build on your question as well around the consumer and customer perception around sustainability, a lot of this has been driven ultimately by our customers and their ambitions, not just with regards to their corporate policies or their brand standard, but what we have seen in one case here in Europe is a coalescing of customers around putting an eco label in front of pack. So one customer of ours had this idea to give the consumer at the shelf in supermarkets the choice to whether they should pick up that product based on a traffic light system as to the environmental impact that product had in production. That's now spawned itself into an NGO called Foundation Earth, which will have the same color coding system as to how you choose foods based on its environmental impact and credentials as you would do around a health traffic light system, which we're well accustomed to these days. So if you look how that one customer has coalesced the creme de la creme of retail in Europe, as well as CPGs who are endorsing this approach, I think this is hugely inspiring because this has come about as a consequence of business recognizing the need for consumers to make these choices and not necessarily being an initiative coming out of London or Brussels.
Okay. Yes.
But it is, just to add to your tweak there on the question, is it possible to replace? You've heard about AAK's capabilities, and we and others in the industry, we are capable of replacing to some extent. There are ways of producing similar fat in many cases, not in all cases, tweaking with other oils and working. So, and we're a multi-oil company. We can help customers, and we do. Some customers want to move out of a certain oil, taking another oil, and we can do that. But I think what we're talking about here is, what about the sustainable future of feeding the world? And then you're asking, is it a choice that you should try to make, in this case, replacing palm oil? We have to ask ourselves, what is then the replacement? Yeah. What is the option? And that's where we say, there is no option today. There are technology maybe in the future that could help us get more sustainable sources of edible oils, for example. And that's where we are investing. But it's not a simple choice of just replacing for something else. It is about making it sustainable.
Yes, and just to make it clear, I think we discussed this before. If you want to do that peak that you want with EBIT in your visions and everything, can you do that by having the land you have, or do you need to increase it when it comes to palm oil?
Well, we don't have any land, to be clear.
No, but to the...
in terms of
do
plantations,
we need to do more?
I think I know what you mean. Do we need more land? Well, there's a lot of scope for increasing yields, which is a big part of the sustainability push. So yields of palm oil are around 4 tonnes per hectare, but the best yields are more like 8 tonnes. So, and 40% is produced by smallholders who average much less than 4 tonnes per hectare. So I think there's a lot of scope for increasing production through yield increase, but there will be more land needed, but it doesn't have to be on primary forest by any means.
Okay. Do we have any questions here to the panel now? Yes. Petronella, yes. Thank you.
Hi, it's Alex Sloane from Barclays. Question for Tim. I imagine sort of earlier this year you maybe had a few sort of nervous days when there was the prospect when there was the palm oil ban in Indonesia. It turned out to be obviously quite short in duration. But has that episode maybe had any impact on how you think about AAK's sourcing longer term?
Thanks, Alex. That's a good question, and it certainly had a few nervous moments, more than a few probably. It lasted a little bit longer. The ban by the Indonesian government on the export of palm oil, and Indonesia producing 48 million tonnes out of that 76 means that they're an important supplier to AAK. I think it means that we have to be wary about government intervention generally, not only from Indonesia, but governments around the world, and what they're doing in terms of perhaps well-intentioned interference in markets, but not being fully aware of the consequences, and those consequences were pretty severe. For the global veg oil market, we saw a huge spike, as Thomas talked about earlier, in palm prices and other veg oil prices as a result of that. We saw a huge disruption on in the logistics, so shipping, because they just couldn't. There were ships waiting to fill up. They all ended up in the wrong places. We managed to work our way through it, which was great, actually, and still come up with good results. So it made me feel good that we could do that, for sure. But also a little bit wary about how governments might act in the future, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
One more.
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
Petronella eller Stina eller Rebecca. We have a gentleman
here
in front row here. Yes.
So thank you. Your target of reaching 100% traceability to plantation, so now you're at 70%, and of course it gets tougher and tougher the closer you get to 100%. So what is the plan B in a case that you see that it's with your existing supplier base, it's very difficult? Are you just going to throw a lot of money into it, or are you going to shift your sourcing to larger players so that you can be sure that you reach the 100%?
Good question as well. I'm sure I thought we'd come to that, but it's 100% verified deforestation free to start with that we're aiming for. The traceability to plantation is really just a means to an end. If you have traceability to plantation, it doesn't do any good unless you've got the verified deforestation free as well. And the verified deforestation free is now at 70%. Traceability to plantation is actually about 84%, I think now. So yes, it's a challenge going forward. We're hitting our target so far. It's 2025. We're aiming to be 100%, and we have to find some innovative ways to do that. It's not just a question of throwing money at it by any means. It's a question of working with those tier 1 suppliers and their suppliers, because a lot of our tier 1 suppliers are refiners as well. They don't entirely have their own plantations to source from for their own refineries. So it's the most important challenge we've got from a sustainability perspective. It also impacts on science-based targets and how we achieve those for Scope 3. So we've got some way to go, but we're quietly confident that we can, or prudently optimistic, I guess is the phrase, that we can get there without.
I think just to build on that and to picture a little bit, driving the right agenda. Traceability was and still is an important way, because that's a way to show transparency. Now, if we can show with the satellite monitoring that we are investing in and using, if we can show that these 10 plantations, there is no more deforestation, and that's one of the primary things. Does it really matter if something came from plantation A or B? Back to your point, right? So, and with that, let's include smallholders. Now we have an area with a lot of smallholders. So instead of being forced to leave the sourcing of smallholders, if we can still prove there's no deforestation, and we can argue we're at least tracing it to this photograph showing no deforestation. I think those are some of the debates we'll have going forward with investors, policymakers, consumers, educated to say, well, maybe that is good enough. Let's not force policy to something that is negative. But again, transparency is important. So in this case, transparent about the photograph might be good enough. So things like that will come.
And maybe just to add to that, I mean, the 3 main ways that we have our verified deforestation free, and VDF, verified deforestation free, is not something which is a standard across the industry at the moment. So we need to be clear about how we calculate that. But there's certification, so the RSPO certification is one thing. There's a satellite monitoring that Johan has mentioned, and then there's working with those tier 1 suppliers so that making sure that they do the right thing, and we can audit them so that we get the right products out and we can verify through them. And progress is quite good at the moment.
Yeah. Just a quick follow-up. In 2025, when you reach that 100%, so do you think that at that point you can convince customers like Orkla to stop bad-mouthing palm oil, and you can convince them that it's okay to have palm oil from you in their product? Or is it more that those customers that are still using palm oil have less of a reason to stop using palm oil? Because we all know the facts, but we don't really have anyone really speaking for palm oil.
Well, that's what, indeed, and thanks, because that's what we're trying to do now here. I think it needs to change. Actually, that narrative needs to change, because even though we're only at 70% verified deforestation free, that doesn't mean the other 30% is from deforestation. It means it's just not verified. Okay, so and given the low levels of deforestation currently in Indonesia and Malaysia and other areas where palm is grown, then it's a strong story. Actually, it's just difficult to change that tanker's direction when it's already heading in a certain direction.
And I think that's also going back to what Johan said. I mean, of course, our customers are also trying to extract value, right? And they have been a bit also riding on that palm-free story, or some of them. And it's really about customers, consumers in the end, understanding the whole picture so that they are able to make the right choice for this planet, right? And then we go back to what Johan said earlier, alternatives. So if we look at converting more mineral oil to plant oil for very good reasons, some being sustainability and biodegradability, then the problem or the need for oil becomes bigger. And then it's the trade-off to mineral oil. Yeah. So where does that leave us? Yeah.
And it's not even the consumers in some ways, because this is too complicated for them to even get near to. Exactly. It's either good or bad. And so we have to convince the influencers, people in civil society, to say the right things, not just criticise palm when they think it's bad, but also to praise it when they think it's good. And then retailers actually very, very influential as well. Absolutely. If they change their mind, and so the UK is a good example of that, where a few retailers are very dominant, but they decided that they would only have certified sustainable, and the whole country had to change. The manufacturers and everything that came in there is now RSPO sustainable. So they can make a big difference.
That's the tipping point. You know, whenever Johan was showing us slides earlier, and he showed the value chain of AAK in the food industry, that penultimate box was the retailer, and I would add into that even the global food service operators. If they were to change their position and embrace sustainable palm, just the top 3 in retail globally and in food service globally, that would have a huge impact downstream in terms of how everyone else then would fall into line behind that. So I think they have a huge part to play in leading this and driving this.
So palm is part of the solution. That's the thing that we get across. It's not so much part of the problem anymore, it's part of the solution.
And the assumption, I think, also too, is about on-pack packaging. Because whenever you're a consumer who's maybe not as well educated as us, who are very passionate about it, they see palm-free, and the automatic assumption is, well, it's palm-free means palm must be bad in the first place. And that just conditions people without the in-depth understanding. And the fact that we're not a B2C brand as such, it's hard for us to influence that. So that's where this conversation needs to be had amongst ourselves and others in this space to sort of drive that change and drive that perception around the realities and the facts of the situation.
And I think
I can go home. I really would like you to touch upon who is responsible for this then. You say it's too complicated, consumer doesn't understand. Are you responsible to enlighten the world, or are your customers, or who?
Well, everybody is really. Everybody who's involved in the industry, right? But we have to convince those who consumers listen to, and the ones that they trust the most, and not necessarily us because they see us as part of the industry already. They're the civil society in particular. So they're the ones that we have to really try to change the minds of.
And I think we're not trying to promote XY today. We're trying to lift a topic. And I think we can certainly understand why a retailer or a producer chooses certain things when perception is whatever it is, or when the need or the ask of consumers. So I think what we're trying to say is to make a real sustainable feeding of the world happening, we need to start seeing facts on the table. So what is really the supply chain of a certain product? What is the CO2 of emission for meat versus a chicken, or a rapeseed based or palm based or other sources? What are the facts on the table? What are the options we have? And I think what we're saying is, let's use the available sources that are out there to make the most, the best possible sustainable supply chain that we could.
And to come back to you, I think indeed AAK has a role to play here. We are multi-oil, so for us there is not everything in one basket, right? And if we don't do it, who's going to do it then?
And as an example, we are now investing in life cycle analysis, CO2 calculators, satellite monitoring, so call it analyzing, bringing facts to the table so that we can act. And at the same time, maybe educate like today, and bring on the conversation, and let's not shy away from it.
Are you happy with that answer? Yes, perfect. Okay, and the gentleman over there, yes, Rebecca, good. So Rebecca, did you replace Stina? Yes. Okay. Okay.
I think we had Kenneth was.
Thanks. Yeah, if I have understood right, today, if you want to buy a certified palm oil, it's a little bit more expensive than just any palm oil. And if you go with a higher and higher share of traceability, will you lose some customers that are only going for the very cheapest palm oil? How about emerging markets? Will you sort of lose some business there where other areas are in focus?
I think there's a clear, well, the balance is not that clear, right? Because it's Europe here on the forefront saying we want deforestation regulation to a level where you wonder if it's at the end going to help the planet or make it even worse if they go with the latest proposals. And there will be a place, I think, for both, right? Because there will be parts of the world who will be slower in adapting that and putting that sustainability topic so high and being able to afford it, which is also a part of it.
Yeah, I think just building, it's crucial about affordability. We cannot expect by European standards or US standard that everything fits everyone, right? But I think I want to bring in this again, a holistic view. If we try to label, certify too much and trace too much, then it becomes very expensive to produce. So I think it's about being smart about these things and for policymakers and us in the industry. So the example of traceability, if you take it to the far extreme, if you want something to be traceable to a rape seed or a hectare in Swedish agriculture or a plantation on palm oil, it might be very difficult because how can you then process a large amount of seeds or palm fruit bunches in an effective manner? If you're going to trace them, then you need to have separate production runs, separate tanks, separate ships to be able to keep that traceable, right? So back to this, maybe a satellite photo. If that is good enough, then you could then process what you have in that photo in an efficient manner. And then affordability in Southeast Asia, in India. So this is, again, where we need to look at it from how do we make the world better versus maybe saying, hey, I'm not doing anything bad, so I'm off the hook. And that's where I think policymakers together with industry has a challenge. We have a challenge together to find the right way of dealing with this.
I think Niall wants to, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's a super interesting question because there's one approach was what we are doing in terms of leading the customer to a better solution, as we were talking about earlier here at the break, but also what maybe we'd like to do in terms of having a coalition of partners that's driving this change. Yeah. So one is what we're doing on plant-based foods, and we anchor around AcoPlanet. And part of our AcoPlanet value proposition, in order to get an AcoPlanet brand name on the product, there needs to be a very strong sustainability story linked to those raw materials. Palm, it has to be segregated as a minimum for the AcoPlanet brand name. What we're doing on coconut with smallholders to protect animal welfare malpractice, and then the low carbon assessment rapeseed that we have coming out of Sweden. Those supply chains warrant the AcoPlanet name, and therefore our go-to-market teams, our customer innovation managers, our sales managers will go to customers leading out on that to show them that there's a better sustainable solution available, and here it is. If the customer decides not to buy into that, we have an alternative option. But through everything that we're doing in plant-based foods, we're leading out with the best sustainable option that we have. But I think in terms of the ideal world, it goes back to my earlier point, that sort of pitch there about losing business because of the premium is somewhat taken off the table. Again, if the three big QSRs and the three big supermarkets decide that they go, let's say, segregated or sustainable on all their private label items and their menu items. So again, I'm putting it back on the retailers that through a coalition of all the stakeholders in the value chain, we need to have a sensible conversation, because us pushing this out will get us so far, but this is an upstream and downstream conversation that needs to happen.
And the higher volume we get into the right bucket, the cost of it becomes lower. Yeah, because then you have enough critical mass and enough runs, enough high volume.
Yeah, and maybe just to come back to your question, not everything needs to be certified on this. So only 19-20% of global production is RSPO certified, and the rest and that's where the premium is. That's where you pay the premium. But you can still get to verified deforestation free. India is a great example, actually, where it's low but increasing demand, as you heard already, for sustainable palm oil. And they've got a great plan there to get to verified deforestation free, which doesn't include necessarily a high proportion of certified. It may include some, but not everything for sure, by using local sourcing and all sorts of other things. So you know, it's not a given that you have to pay a premium for everything just to get the right answer.
Again, a submitted question from Per Jørgensen, INT Asset Management. Question for Tim. I'm not sure if you've answered it, but I'll put it anyway. I'll see what you say. How do you secure that even more sourced veg oil live up to your ESG standards? And question for Susanne. Do you see more optimization in the European production footprint?
Well, I think probably have answered it actually in terms of the VDF. That's the issue. So
let's continue to Susanne then.
Optimization, European production footprint. I'm not 100% sure where he's heading with the question. I mean, in general, of course, we can always work on getting out more with what we already have, at least to the limits that are doable in optimizing production and portfolios. But maybe to also show it from a different angle and ask back, because it's not too long ago, just after I joined, that we had a war starting, and everybody, also some of our customers, got really concerned that there would be no sunflower. Now, they had gone to formulate palm out for the pressure, but now they were coming back and saying, can you develop for us a product? Can you go back to palm oil, please? And find a product with the same performance, just that we have a backup, right? So it's not that easy to predict what's going to happen, right? And I think if we make ourselves too dependent, it's the whole basket we have out there, right? Yeah. It's the mix between the oils.
Yeah.
From another perspective, AAK has sourced shea from West Africa for more than 60 years. Is that correct? Can you explain the model a bit on how it ties into your business now and going forward? And I'm talking about, you have some projects over there, so who wants to shortly explain?
I can try, but I can't even, not even I can remember 60 years ago, I'm afraid. But I know we've been doing it for a long time, and we've had and she, as Johan explained earlier, is an important ingredient for us, particularly in chocolate and confectionery fats.
And also in personal care, skincare products.
Indeed.
Shea butter.
Yeah. It's for those of you who don't know and didn't see the video or the presentation last year, which was great and explained it in detail. She is grown in West Africa, or it's not really grown. It just grows. It's not a plantation crop. It's a wild crop. Around 2 million tons a year is the estimate of the total available crop. Around 1 million tons is harvested by women in the villages, traditionally, up country. And about 500,000 tons of that is then exported. We have a project there which is directly involving 300,000 women called Cola Nafaso. And that means that we have 300 people employed in West Africa, 6 different countries. And the Cola Nafaso project operates particularly in Burkina Faso, in Ghana, and in Ivory Coast. And we support those women by giving them financing in advance of the season to help them through what is traditionally a low period for their income. And we give them training, and we support them in terms of how they do the initial processing, which is drying, deshelling, and boiling. And that's fantastic. That's a fantastic scheme, which actually ties in very well with our customers as well. We don't do it because we're feeling particularly charitable, even though it does make us feel good inside. There are commercial advantages as well. So we have, as you said earlier, Johan, schemes with Mars in particular, the Wish project, which is Women in She, which is a sort of Cola Nafaso Plus, and other schemes out there with customers which are tremendously successful, and it's a great scheme, as well as giving us security of supply rather than relying on local traders. So it's a real success story.
It's used in chocolate and confectionery and personal care. Clearly, global industries. So these shea kernels picked, or rather the shea fruits that fall down, picked up far out in the bush in West Africa is part of a sustainable use of chocolate and skincare products globally with global customers of ours. So in that sense, it's also a sustainable source of, call it, demand, needing something from us, we need something from them, and I think that adds to it. So it's not a short-term thing.
Shifting focus a bit, still you're welcome with any questions, even if we do shift focus, because talking about future is very exciting when it comes to food.
Yeah.
What about your bets for the future? You mentioned something about that initially. Could you help us understand what new innovation solutions there are?
And we will, and maybe start with like a bridge from what we discussed. In this conversation so far, we discussed a lot about different plant-based oils, right, and sustainability and so forth. Another piece is, of course, about the diets, right? What about animal-based food? The land use for that, opportunities to shift, extremely important in the total debate about sustainable food supply chain. I think, and that's where we, of course, are tapped into plant-based food.
Indeed, and it's very much part and parcel of what we're doing day in, day out on plant-based foods as an industry team to support our global regions with specific focus on the two largest regions, which is North America and Europe in terms of consumption. And the innovation for us in this space is very dynamic, where we are using our fat chemistry and our knowledge of the application to bring functional specialty ingredients to our customers, ultimately to make better plant-based foods. I think we have all recognized, yes, there is a slowdown in the consumer market. One is the more macroeconomics of the cost of living crisis, and there is still that price differential. But there's also a piece that the products aren't good enough. That's broadly accepted. And therefore, the investments that we're making in the Centre of Excellence in Amsterdam, which is world class, and I invite you all to come there, hopefully for the official opening on the 20th of March. But that's going to be a game changer. And I know that word's used, maybe much too often these days. But how we revolutionize our customer inspiration and engagement to make better product through what we would call our specialty fat delivery systems for plant-based meat and plant-based dairy, it's super exciting.
And how do you know that this will fly?
Because we're selling these solutions today. So what I would say, Lydia, is that we're probably, to use the iPhone analogy, in version 3.0 of the iPhone, where the first very crude, I would say, formulations in plant-based meat, from our perspective, uses just coconut oil. But then when you look at the nutritional claims of that, the nutritional claim for the saturated fat wasn't too great. And therefore, there was version 2.0 was a crude reformulation to use just rapeseed oil. So now my nutritionals are great, but it leaves me with a dry product. And this inhibits the taste experience that consumers feel so challenged about whenever they're buying into effectively what is more expensive products. So our sweet spot in AAK is where we've been developing fat systems that deliver on the sensory and eating experience that consumers are used to through real meat, for example. So with real meat, you expect to see the marbling of the fat. You expect it to sizzle on cooking. You expect it to brown, and then you're expecting that juicy mouthfeel on eating. There's no one fat system or fat will do all of that. So going and formulating a product just with coconut or just with rapeseed is a recipe for failure. And what we do in AAK is we look at those attributes in terms of functionality and sensory that consumers are expecting, channel specific as well, because our solutions for food service and retail are different, whereby we try to mimic that through fats. So believe it or not, in some of our best products out there that our customers are buying into, we could have 2 or 3 different fats coming together as an overall fat system to deliver on the look, the sizzle, the brown, and the eating experience. And that is what our customers see value in, and that's why we're growing EBIT successfully in plant-based foods over the past couple of years.
Next time, I would like you to bring it here so we can taste it. Yes, please.
Yes, I have a question for you, Susanne. Johan talked earlier and positioned AAK sort of in the vertical value chain here in the introductory presentation. You've worked in a number of other industries, and previously as a management consultant. What do you see as the sort of attractive possible horizontal adjacencies for AAK? Because obviously you're sort of part of a wider food ingredient industry. What are some of those adjacent segments?
Well, we have already moved on some, like the lecithin as an example, right? There are several of those, and some are in the food and some are outside the food space as well, when we look at the new naturals, but are very close to what we can be doing. Special nutrition is an obvious one, right, where we do have a joint venture as well. What else can you add to it to sell complete packages that will deliver additional value to our customers? Because at the end of the day, that's what it is. And I think we are looking at some of them. Johan mentioned that already earlier as well. But it also needs to come at the right price, right? I don't think AAK is going to be a player and what we've seen in the last years, I had a short time in M&A at JP Morgan during my studies, and I decided not to join that because I've said it destroys too much value. So you need to be smart on where you put your money there. There are obvious pieces in the special nutrition when you look at microbiome, topics like that looking forward. The traditional ones, you also see the big companies struggle, right? You see an IFF struggle with the breadth of the portfolio that they have, and how do I still deliver value if I have commodities that are just plug and play versus highly specialized ones where it's all about the application, which is where we also see AAK, right? For us, we can add the value because we understand how is the product run at the customer. So what does it need from us to make their end product better?
And at the same time, just building on that back to, we're partly looking at what we can acquire, call it the expanding of to adjacencies. But we also see, especially in the space of plant-based food and potentially new food solutions, and I mentioned that, strategic partnerships. So flavors and fragrances houses where we don't necessarily look for an M&A opportunity, but knowing how important fat is for the mouthfeel, how can we work more closely together with others in the industry to strategically develop and accelerate some of these new solutions? That is certainly an area we're working with, and we're obviously not showing a list of our strategic partner options, but expect that to be part of it, and it already is.
It is.
We already have joint projects.
Yeah, so Mista is a great example. It's well publicized. It's a Givaudan ecosystem in San Francisco. We're a partner in that, along with Ingredion, Christian Hansen, Mars, Danone, Conagra. So we're all sitting around the same table, VPs of innovation, chief technology officers, brainstorming, wargaming the future of food, and in particular with a heavy lens on plant-based. So we're sitting around those tables as equal partners, whereby given the specialty nature of Givaudan, of Christian Hansen, of Ingredion, and given the fact also, which is hugely important, that the value systems of those organizations are closely aligned, you know, with our respective specialty focuses, together we're stronger and we're not competing. And it's been a hugely effective way forward for us, I would say, to date, and expect more of that.
And I think there is a room, right? But you need to understand the application to be able to make 1 + 1 more than 2.
Mm-hmm. Thank
you. Yes, we have a lady
Joe
over here. Before we do that, because time flies, and we need to clarify something. This is for you, Tim, on sustainability again. So we go back a little bit. Earlier, you, Tim, mentioned something about how much land is needed to grow different crops. Can you repeat those numbers? Did you say that it took 4 to 10 times as much land to grow other crops that is not palm?
Yes, that's easy. I did. That's what I said, and that's the big difference it makes.
Maybe they don't believe you.
Well, yeah, okay. I guess it's recorded.
I believe you.
It's not just me that's making this up, for sure. Yeah, for palm, it's about 3.8 tons per hectare. For rape, it's about 0.8 tons of oil per hectare that you get out. And for soy, it's less than that, but you get some protein from soy as well, clearly.
And this was one of the first slides you showed me when we met the first time.
Yeah, indeed.
And this is an important information for everybody to...
It's really important because, as I said, as the world population grows, as demand grows for vegetable oil, then we will need more land as well as increasing yields, but you need a lot more land for other oils than palm oil. So, yeah.
Okay, now we've clarified that. We are still on innovations and future. Yes, please.
Hi, this is Joan from BNP Paribas Exane. So I have two questions, one for Tim, which is kind of on the deforestation point. The new EU regulation, how does that impact AAK? And also for Susanne, IFF, they are divesting some of their business segments, such as, I think, emulsifiers. Would this be an area of interest for AAK?
Do you want to start?
Be a pleasure. EU regulations. Joan, we spoke in the break about this a little bit as well, so thanks for asking this question again. The EU regulation on due diligence for deforestation, just to provide some context, is something that is not agreed yet. It's in a trialogue at the moment between the Council, European Parliament and European Commission. The drafts, it's exactly the sort of thing that we'd be encouraging. We need policymakers to get involved, as they have done in Indonesia and Malaysia and other places, and it's the right sort of thing. We're all heading for no deforestation. We have some, and of course the implications for AAK is that we'll need to comply with it. It's likely to become law probably in Q1 next year, maybe Q2, and then the implementation period will be probably between 12 and 18 months, but it's still under negotiation. However, it does seem to indicate that we will need to have traceability and geolocation of the origin of the oil that we bring into Europe. That's not just palm, that's also soy, and it also covers cocoa, coffee, and timber, and beef, I think, actually. And although the scope has not been finalised yet either. It may also be extended to rubber and maize, not that they're a particular issue for us. So we'll have to comply with that, and we're concerned, and we've been lobbying actually that as Susanne said earlier, that the consequences of that may not be as intended. It may just be something that makes everybody in Europe feel better about the fact that they haven't got deforestation-free palm oil on their plate. But because of the way it's structured, it could be exclusive. So it excludes all those who don't comply, and there's no incentive for them to comply. It's not, as Johan said earlier, we engage to transform. So we engage with the supply chain in order to get it changing and get it moving. This is the risk of this regulation as it stands at the moment, is that it will just exclude everybody that doesn't want to be part of it, and then there will be no incentive for them to continue to join, partly because Europe is relatively small as part of the palm oil total demand for palm oil for food, which is around 2 million tonnes in Europe and about 5 million tonnes for biodiesel, by the way, in Europe, compared with 76 million tonnes in total for globally. So we'll have to comply, as will everybody else in Europe. There will be likely be some costs in that, although it's not very clear because we don't know how the regulations are going to go yet, and it's going to be the same for competitors as well. So we're a little disappointed that the consequence, it hasn't taken. We don't think really they've taken enough time on this. They're pushing it through, and they haven't thought through the consequences properly.
And maybe to add on that, we've also the concern around the smallholders.
Yeah.
We as Europe said for years we need to find a way to rebalance the wealth in the world. So with a lot of effort, we have these smallholders who are growing, but they have no way to be compliant under what's there on the paper at the moment. That's pretty clear. Yeah. So that means now, after we first pushed them there, now we say again, no thank you. So we are not being consistent here. So we do see quite a risk to add on that, not inclusive, right?
While at the same time, I think that's important. We really embrace policymakers to step in. Yeah. I often take the example of the car industry, automotive industry. How many electric vehicles would be rolling in Europe, US, and so forth if it wasn't for a combined effort on legislation for car makers, incentives, etc., right? So we're certainly acknowledging that policymakers needs to step in together with retailers, to your point, together with our customers, the producers of food, us and everyone else. But again, you get what you ask for a little bit, so it's important that it drives the right incentives.
Yes, I just would like to do
Another question.
You had another question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes,
The
who was
emulsifier
that?
question.
Yes.
No,
For you.
the second question on the emulsifiers.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. They are looking at divesting various parts of it. We have a natural emulsifier business with a lecithin. Now, if you thought that the graphs that Thomas showed earlier were a bit wild, look at the prices for lecithin. You will think it's completely stable, what happened this year. So with regards to that, it's for us a choice again. And I go back to is 1 and 1 more than 2? Or do we choose to play where we think we really make a difference? And we are looking at these things, absolutely, because those are the spaces where the question was also earlier. What adjacent spaces in the horizontal line are you looking at? We do that. Are all of them all that attractive? I think we have a lot of value to still extract from our business as we have it. And unless it's an obvious case, my preference would be let's extract that value.
Yeah. All right.
I would like to invite Dheeraj and Thomas just to mark that we now have a general Q&A and you can ask anything. But
Great.
so we will just change positions. Dheeraj, please welcome to the stage, and Thomas as well. To round up these discussions, is there anything else we need to underline? Talking about growth, sustainability, innovations, anything you want to add?
I think maybe one thing to add is what we had in the presentation, maybe not so much in the fireside chat, but there are also alternatives, right? Or new technology that we said, Green On that we invested in just now in the family of Power to X. There's Power to Fuel, Power to Food. So in essence, pretty cool. And we just saw an example last week in an event with Green On. Already an oil that a chef in Sweden was making a béarnaise sauce coming from this process using CO2, energy, and water. That's pretty cool. Ability to now. There's going to be a lot of work to make this technology, scalable and commercially viable, etc. But it gives a hint about opportunities. I think what we're saying is that we're a multi-oil company. We're working with applications. We're having a strong sustainability agenda. So we're quite optimistic that there are solutions for the world as we go forward. But it's a tricky landscape to navigate, right? And I think that's just one thing to mention. We're confident in opportunities going forward.
Maybe let me add one thing also,
yes,
because
sure.
there was earlier the questions around the volume concern. What will turn the volumes, right? That exactly also goes in the innovation space. We're looking at replacing mineral oils. We believe there's at least around 10 million metric tons of oil that could be transformed to plant-based on the technology that we already know and are capable as doing as AAK, right? So that accesses a complete new branch of it, right?
Yeah. And maybe to add on that, I made the point earlier, but I think I just reinforce it. Is there a real debate yet on the diet, sustainable diets, and should we replace more? Could we find other ways? So we've been talking a lot about this, the plant-based food sector. I think, it's trying to replace one-to-one. Here is a plant-based burger. It's one-to-one plant, it's 100% plant-based. But take minced meat that we use in a bolognese sauce or something. What if it is 20% meat and 80% a plant-based solution? That is still an 80% reduction of meat usage. But it might solve the taste experience for us. I actually had in my dinner table when my wife said, we didn't have enough, so we blended it. And the whole family said, this was great minced meat that we had. The taste was great. It was just a mix. I don't know what the percentage was. So I think there is so much opportunity to transform when we as consumers start opening up our eyes. We're quite conservative in how we eat.
And this hybrid approach that Johan's outlining there, is very much applicable to this plant-based food space today in meat, but also looking forward in terms of the cultivated meat space. There's obviously a lot of hurdles to overcome in terms of production, in terms of affordability, in terms of the regulatory environment, but getting that down to a cost and use where it's affordable, it could come through a hybrid approach as Johan's outlining. And also with that, this dam is starting to burst, because whilst it was, in terms of the cultivated meat area, in the sense that Singapore was the first to approve it, the Netherlands has now approved it for sampling. And now, a couple of weeks ago, we've got the FDA give no questions asked to Upside Foods for their cultivated chicken. So again, as that becomes much more common around the world to drive affordability and accessibility of that technology in the future, that approach that Johan's outlining here could be one of the routes to affordability for such technology in the future.
Yeah, and I added it in the context of, is there future volume, right? If you think about this, if it does happen, that's huge volumes in transition.
Okay, Tesla in Stafford 36.1 is still into figures here. So he has a question here. You mentioned that ND EBITDA is around the 1.9 and likely to tick up in Q4. Please comment on what is the long-run target ND EBITDA for the group?
Could you repeat that question?
No, but you can read it by yourself.
Net debt to, yeah. It's likely to tick up. What is the long? Okay, fair enough. Now I get it. Net debt to, the question was about what is your net debt and it's expected. Maybe that's one for you, Thomas.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, we with the delay that we see in the measurement, we expected to, given the raw material prices that we're still experiencing 6 to 9 months back with the delay, we expect that to continue slightly upwards. But as the raw material prices have dropped, and we now in the beginning of 2023 and the first half of 23 will see everything else equal, a reduction of our working capital, also affecting cash flows and so forth. The expectation then, all else equal, outside of M&As and everything else, that measurement will then come down somewhat.
Yeah. So if you just, without making a forecast and without making a formal estimation of the future, if you just see the build-up of our net working capital and the cash that took, of course, when things come down again, we expect that to come back. Yeah. And that should have a positive impact on our net debt to EBITDA. Mm-hmm. And we used to be at 1.25, as you said. Yeah, and let's see where we land. It's depending on how it develops. And if we continue to deliver strong earnings, of course, that also adds to reduction in net debt. But at the same time, we have an M&A agenda, and that might push it up again. So.
Of course. Yeah. Any final questions? Wow, everything is crystal clear. I'm happy to see. Actually, this means that we are going to wrap things up here. And I would like to thank the panel. I mean, you will still be here. We can still mingle. We can still discuss. How do you wrap up this? Before you say anything, I really have to remind people that all the presentations will be on your website. And the recordings will also be there later on. It's all yours.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you, Lydia, for guiding us through this afternoon. Thank you, everyone in the room. Fantastic to have you here, and love to get these questions that you pose to us, and also to everyone live. And we have gotten a few questions also from the broadcasting of this event in a hybrid context. So thanks a lot to you that have listened in. And last but not least, to colleagues helping us to run this day, helping us to organize this day. I hope that you, as stakeholders to AAK, have gotten good information from us, have been enlightened in a few areas, and will continue to challenge us in many areas. And with that, thank you so much. It's been a great day.
Do you know what you're famous for?
No.
Your carry-on gift bags.
All right.
They are brilliant.
So important information coming up.
Yeah.
Where are they?
They are outside. Before we go home, you will have one.
Great.
Yes. And with that said,
thank you so
very much.
And we are here if you want to have more questions.
Thank you.